Welcome to Community Focus. I'm Breanne Loving. Last week, I had the opportunity to sit down with Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole, and let me tell you, it was a great interview. The interview was so great that it had to be split into two parts. So this week, I'm going to share with you part 2 of my interview with Congressman Tom Cole. Now, keep in mind that this was recorded last week, and news is ever-changing. So no lengthy introduction or welcoming soundbite this week. Let's just get down to business on Community Focus.
Well, we're always working on defense initiatives. It's a very heavy defense district with Fort Sill at one end of the district, Tinker Air Force at the other. So, frankly, saving 7 AWACS planes that were proposed to be cut. There's only 31 in the Air Force and 27 were stationed at Tinker. So saving those 7 planes was a big deal. We've worked a lot on Indian affairs. This is a district with 11 different Indian tribes. I'm a tribal member myself, a very proud Chickasaw. So over the last few years, we've been able to increase federal funding for Indian health care by almost 40%. It's actually been an area we've worked pretty closely with the president. The president has an excellent record on Native American issues. And so he quite often reaches out to me on those and says, I need you to be my Republican counterpart on this, because most Indian things are bipartisan. So we've done those things. I sit on the budget committee and have helped Paul Ryan craft 4 budgets that have passed, and now Tom Price, his replacement. And those are very significant budget committee. And then I'm always involved in just the process of what moves across the floor. I sit on the Rules Committee as well, and that's the smallest committee in Congress, only 13 members, and every bill that's controversial has to have a rule attached to it. That limits the amount of debate, what points of order are relevant, if any, what amendments are allowed. So it's very important from the majority standpoint that you set it up in a way that you're going to be able to pass it. So that means almost anything that comes across the floor has come in front of a committee I sat on, and we've played some role in shaping the battlefield, if you will, of legislation.
I want to talk about, because we're here in the Lawton Fort Sill area, National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. How does that affect our military personnel with regard to operations and readiness?
It's tremendously important. First of all, everything that, every penny we spent has to be, quote, authorized, and that's what this is. So how much are you going to spend on the PIM program, which would be the Paladin Integrated Management Program, which is upgrading the cannons at Fort Sill. What sort of monies is going to be devoted to training, which would be like, again, our infantry school here at Fort Sill. So every single decision is made in that bill. And it's passed both houses. It's reached the president's desk. The president has threatened to veto it. The differences really aren't too much in the defense area. Both the president and the Republican House and Senate have appropriated almost exactly the same amount of money, and mostly in the same ways. The dispute is the president wants to raise domestic spending in other areas, and so he would like to use defense, if you will, as a bargaining chip. There's also a dispute over how the money is spent. The president wants it in the baseline, which actually I would agree with if we can get there. That's a preferable way to do it. We plussed up, as it's called, or added more money to the Overseas Operations Contingency Account, OCO money, as it's called, and the president would prefer that be different. But frankly, I would argue for a $600 billion plus defense bill, we're pretty close. This shouldn't be vetoed. This is much more about domestic spending and increasing that than it is about profound differences over what we do in the military.
What's the news coming from Washington about filling the Speaker of the House vacancy?
Total chaos right now. The Speaker surprised us all the day after the Pope was in Congress and announcing that he was going to step down at the end of October. Now he technically remains Speaker until we actually elect the new Speaker. So if we don't get that done by the 29th of October, he would still be Speaker. That Speaker is, after the Vice President, next in line for the presidency, so you would never allow that to become vacant, and Speaker Boehner wouldn't. Well, when they announced that, he set a date for an election for the Republican nominee. The Democratic nominee for the job would be former Speaker Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi. But we have the vote, so normally we would win. And Kevin McCarthy, who was the majority leader, the number 2 person behind Speaker Boehner, announced that he would run. So did a couple of other Republicans. But you need to get to 218 votes. Kevin had 200 immediately. And that's enough to nominate him. And then you would assume the other Republicans would vote for their nominee. Well, a group of about 40 Republicans have said they're not going to do that. They wanted more change in leadership, and they wanted a lot of rules changes. So Kevin was trying to win them over. We got to Election Day, and he got up and announced, I don't think I'm the right guy. I don't have 218 votes. I think we need a fresh face. So that just caused chaos that occurred. Since then, I think the person that most people want, including myself, would be Paul Ryan. Paul was our Republican vice presidential nominee last election. He's universally regarded as one of the most brilliant economic thinkers. He's chairman of Ways and Means, which is the tax writing arm of Congress. But he also recognizes that, hey, I'm the person most likely to be able to put everything together. And if he did it, he might only do it for the year, get us through the next election, and then step back down again, go back to chairman of Ways and Means, which is his first love. He's never wanted to be in House leadership. He's always wanted to really craft tax policy and trade policy, and he's done that brilliantly. So here he is on the verge of getting his dream job, and then Boehner leaving and McCarthy not being able to get the votes has sort of cast him in a very difficult position.
Mm-hmm. Well, now I want to talk about the political landscape before we go. How do you feel about the upcoming presidential election?
Well, normally these things are very predictable. On the Republican side, there's a favorite. There's somebody that challenges them. They scare them, and then the favorite wins. And it always happens that way. The Democratic side is chaotic and colorful, and there's lots of different clans. And now we have like role reversal this election. The Democrats look like Republicans normally do. They have a favorite in Secretary Clinton. They've got a couple of good challengers, and so I think she clearly probably likely. On our side, I think it's impossible to predict. We've got a group of outsiders that are very unlikely candidates, particularly in Donald Trump and Ben Carson. We've got some people that folks thought would do well that have already dropped out, like Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, and the current governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker. You've got Bush struggling in the polls, and that's historically been a pretty good name, but a lot of Republicans want change. You got Rubio, whose generational change obviously would perhaps help Republican amongst Hispanics where they've not done well. You've got Ted Cruz, who's sort of the Tea Party darling. So and then throw in John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, Carly Fiorina, who's knocked it out of the park in a couple of her debate performances. It is. I don't think anybody could tell you.
It's hard to predict.
Well, I would say impossible to predict right now. So much so that Republicans are beginning to think they might have something we haven't seen on either side in over half a century, and that's a brokered convention where literally different candidates show up at the convention without enough votes to be certain they would be the nominee. And we had a little bit of that in '76 between Reagan and Ford, but it's extremely rare.
That's Congressman Tom Cole, serving the 4th District of Oklahoma. Thank you so much for sharing your
Hey,
thoughts
it's been
on
great
everything.
to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, thank you so much. And you can learn more at cole.house.gov. And if you missed any part of this interview or last week's, why don't you head over to kccu.org? It looks like it's about that time, so hey, thanks for joining me on Community Focus right here on KCCU.